It's time to abort your whole friggin' species.
What happened? After 10 years of burning up the sales charts with a slew of groundbreaking games, developer and publisher Apogee, also known as 3D Realms, was on top of the world. In 1995, they released Rise of the Triad. Afterwards, that crew got to work on a game called Prey. In 1996, they released Duke Nukem 3D. Afterwards, that crew got to work on a game called Duke Nukem Forever. By the standards of the mid-90s, both games should have been completed in a year or two for a few $100,000. Prey took 10 years and millions of dollars to finally release, and the unreleased Duke Nukem Forever ended production 13 years later after having spent the entire Apogee fortune. What happened? Lean back and enjoy yourselves for this one, guys. It's gonna be a treat. It's easy to forget now, but you have to remember, when these projects started, they were great ideas. Rise of the Triad was a successful game, and its crew had a lot of cool new concepts for their new title, Prey. Right at the beginning, they were offered the chance to use the build engine that powered Duke Nukem 3D. However, they opted to develop a more powerful next-gen engine for themselves instead. Alright, so far, so good. They knew they wanted another shooter game, but at the same time, they wanted to turn the genre on its ear. So they went for a couple of innovative choices, making the hero a Native American instead of a white guy, and coming up with the concept of portals for the first time in gaming history. Portals were shortcuts through space that allowed the player to move vast distances instantly. It was a game-changing feature. It was also a technical nightmare. Getting the engine code to a point that it could handle portals took more time and effort than expected. Worse, project lead Tom Hall did not get along creatively with Apogee heads Scott Miller and George Broussard. In 1996, Hall decided he'd had enough and walked away from the project. Unfortunately, most of the Prey crew followed him. In game development terms, that's bad. But also in '96, Duke Nukem 3D came out and sold 3.5 million copies, so all seemed to be going well for the company. It was announced in '97 that a sequel was on the way, once again under the leadership of George Broussard. A 1998 release date was also set. Miller and Broussard had huge ambitions for Duke, hoping to expand Duke into other media for decades to come. But for now, they just had the one game in the works, and for it, they went back to their old contacts at id Software. Despite their troubled earlier relationship, Apogee licensed the new Quake 2 engine from id and got to work. Meanwhile, a brand new crew was hired to pick up Prey where it had been left off. Enough new work was done to show off a demo of the game at E3 1997, which was well received by the press. So 1998 should have been a huge year for the company, with the release of both Prey and Duke Nukem Forever. Both games came to E3 and showed off their muscle for all to see. Then, both teams came back to Dallas. Independently, both the Prey team and the Duke crew decided that their engines weren't cutting it. On the Prey side, their home-built proprietary engine wasn't looking as good as they'd hoped. On the Duke side, the Quake 2 engine was proving to be better suited to small, enclosed environments than big, wide-open spaces. And for Duke, they wanted big, epic set pieces. So virtually at the same time, the Prey team decided to stop design and retool the whole engine, and the Duke team announced that they were switching to the new Unreal Engine from Epic Mega Games. The latter was a huge deal. They'd already spent a small fortune licensing the Quake 2 engine. Now they'd have to do that again with Unreal and rebuild every single asset they'd made since the start of the project. This was not a good turn of events. As if that wasn't enough bad news, by the end of the year, the Prey crew was floundering. The artists and designers couldn't work without an engine, and the engine guys were months away from finishing their overhaul. Tensions mounted, and once again, the project leads left the company. Sensing disaster, and with enough issues on the Duke side of things, Apogee quietly shut down the game. Years of production time, budget, and energy, gone. So all eyes were on Duke Nukem Forever to save the day. As a company, they were still in good shape. Duke Nukem 3D had been such a massive hit that they had money to burn. Unfortunately, Broussard decided to burn it, and burn it, and burn it. Worse, because of 3D's success, Broussard got it into his head that Forever needed to be the best game anybody had ever seen. The problem was, there are lots of talented people in the gaming industry, and they were making great games. Anytime Broussard played a game with a feature or graphics or a mechanic or a setting that Duke Nukem didn't have, he decided that his crew needed to make it. The horrible irony here was that Broussard was desperately trying to lead the pack by following the crowd. The problem with this philosophy is that it doesn't lead to a focused project. Broussard had a laundry list of elements he wanted in his game, but no plan for how they should tie together. Eventually, Forever became a jumbled mess of good ideas that in no way cohered into an actual game. Still, to the outside world, it looked like they were crafting a masterpiece. In 2000, Take-Two Interactive acquired the publishing rights to Duke Nukem Forever for $12 million. Surely with that much new cash, Apogee could wait as long as they wanted to release the game, right? But at E3 2001, it looked like the wait might finally be over. Once again, Apogee made a big splash at the convention and showed off a brand new trailer for the game with a lot of fanfare. As long as it came out soon, it would surely be well reviewed and sell like crazy. It didn't come out. Right around this time, the Apogee crew started thinking about that Prey game again. They clearly had their hands full with Duke Nukem, but they wanted another game in production. Over the years, they'd gotten to know a lot of other developers, and they were impressed by the guys at Human Head Studios. And so, Apogee offered Human Head the task of finishing Prey once and for all. As a bonus, they knew their old id buddies were about to finish up the Doom 3 tech and figured that they could use their old connections to get the engine before any other third party. In other words, Prey, a game originally meant to showcase Apogee's own engine, would now be using outside tech. Human Head agreed and waited for the Doom 3 engine to arrive, which took about a year longer than it was supposed to, making for yet another delay on yet another game. But at long last, Prey finally released onto store shelves in July 2006 for PC, alongside an Xbox 360 port developed by Venom Games. After all these years, the portal still made it into the finished game. However, they were not player-controlled, which meant that they were effectively just doors, although you could shoot yourself in the head with them. The game featured other, newer ways of messing with space as well, shifting gravity so that players could walk on walls and ceilings, and a spirit walk feature that let players get into blocked areas. It received good reviews, and by October of that year had sold 1 million copies. Not bad for a new IP. That being said, for a game that had been in development for 11 years, it certainly did not leave the impact on the gaming world that Apogee might have hoped. But at least, at last, it was done. Though tellingly, to finish the game, they'd had to give it to somebody else. They refused to give Duke to anyone else, insisting that only the crew under George Broussard could possibly make a title good enough to be worthy of a, now aging, gaming icon. But age took its toll, in unexpected ways. For one thing, Apogee paid their developers low salaries in exchange for a big share of the royalties. But no game meant no royalties, which meant that the staff had been underpaid for close to a decade now. Worse, since Apogee hadn't actually made a game since Shadow Warrior in 1997, it was hard to attract new talent, who now associated Apogee with endless delays. As if that wasn't enough, the game industry is a fast-changing one, and 10 years is a long time in that world. By 2006, Apogee had only spent about $7.5 million on Duke Nukem Forever, with a staff of about 36 people. But by the mid-2000s, a big game could cost well over $20 million to make, with a staff of 75 or more people. Apogee was still proceeding with the same production philosophy they had started with in 1997. If it wasn't enough back then, it was woefully inadequate now. As time went on, things only got more embarrassing for the studio. Technology evolved at a relentless pace. It would be nearly impossible for the little crew to create cutting-edge graphics. The game became the butt of endless jokes from both consumers and the press. The name didn't help anything. Not only was Forever right there in the title, but the initials were DNF, which racing fans know means did not finish. Famously, one fan actually started a website called the Duke Nukem Forever List, which listed all the things that had happened in the world since the start of DNF's production. Highlights include Google's entire existence, Britney Spears' entire career, and every single iProduct from Apple. For that matter, the list points out that the Beatles' entire career took less time than Duke Nukem Forever's production. And most astoundingly, from Kennedy's challenge to One Small Step, man landed on the moon in less time than it took George Broussard to make a game. By 2009, the jig was up. Despite re-releasing Duke Nukem 3D in 2008 for Xbox Live Arcade, Apogee was at last out of cash. After 12 entire years, Miller and Broussard were finally realizing that they had a problem. So they went to their publisher, Take-Two, and asked for $6 million to finally finish off the game. The publisher offered $2.5 million. For whatever reason, Apogee refused. After that, it was all over. On May 6, 2009, Apogee laid off its entire development team. For the first time in its existence, Apogee was not a developer, just a publisher with nothing to publish. As if enough bad news hadn't already beleaguered the guys, Take-Two sued them for never completing the promised Duke Nukem Forever. Apogee countersued Take-Two since the publisher had themselves never developed a different, contractually obligated Duke game, Duke Begins. The case was settled out of court and dropped in June 2010. After all this, Apogee still refuses to throw in the towel. In June 2010, they re-released another old Duke game, Duke Nukem Manhattan Project for the Xbox Live Arcade. And for that matter, 3D Realm still claims that they're working on Duke Nukem Forever, though what the nature of this work is, no one knows. For his part, Scott Miller started a new company in 2007, Radar Group, to develop new media franchises. Prey 2 is among the titles he's trying to get off the ground. However, to date, nothing but concept art has ever come out of Radar. Once upon a time, Scott Miller came up with a business model that was genuinely groundbreaking. And once upon a time, George Broussard made a game that was a smash hit. The problem was, after such huge early successes, they assumed that anything they touched would turn to gold. Taking the time to make sure your project is done right is an admirable thing, but only to a point. Nothing will ever be perfect. At some point, you have to finish what you've done and release it. Miller and Broussard could never get to that point, and now they've paid the price both in cash and reputation. For what it's worth, their story now stands as a warning to the rest of the gaming community. That delaying a game is not always for the best. That a great game is a focused vision, and not a collection of disconnected ideas. And that even a company that has reached the highest apogee can still fall to its perigee.